Jerusalem's night sky exploded with golden fire. It wasn't war, it wasn't weather, it was something else. A glowing figure descended above the dome of the rock, surrounded by what eyewitnesses swear were angels. Wings spread wide, eyes like lightning, and silence fell just before the sky shook with trumpet sounds. No radar, no warning, just awe, fear, and a question that split the world. Was this the return of Christ, or the beginning of the final deception? It didn't come with warning, only with wonder. At 3:47 a.m., above the most contested and consecrated patch of earth in human history, the heavens did something they weren't supposed to do. The clouds didn't just part, they fractured. And from that fracture, something came through. Witnesses described it as liquid fire pouring into the atmosphere. A golden radiance, not like sunlight, but like the memory of something ancient returning. It didn't scatter like a spotlight or beam down like lightning. It descended, controlled, intentional, alive. The light didn't just shine, it chose. It targeted the dome of the rock. For centuries, theologians, imams, rabbis, and mystics have debated what would happen when heaven once again touched this ground. That night, it did, and nothing has been the same since. People who had been asleep said they felt a pressure on their chest, something pulling them awake. Others heard nothing but silence, a deep, holy silence, followed by a sound no human language can fully contain. A trumpet, but not like anything made of brass or metal. This was sound wrapped in spirit. It vibrated through the bones. Then came the shapes. Above the golden dome, through the liquid fire, they appeared. Wings, too many to count, arched across the heavens like drawn swords, waiting for command. Figures stood in stillness, clothed in light, silent but watching. Eyewitnesses described a wall of flame with eyes. Others fell to their knees, some from faith, others from sheer terror. And at the center of them all, a figure, clothed in a robe that shimmered like molten silver, his face too radiant to stare into, and yet somehow too familiar to turn away from. He stood in the light, above the dome, unmoved by the winds of the earth. And the moment he raised his hand, the entire city seemed to pause, as if the stone, the air, and time itself were waiting. Was this the Son of Man, returning just as promised? Or something wearing the light of heaven to deceive the eyes of earth? The line between hope and horror thinned in that moment, and all of Jerusalem held its breath. The silence did not last long. Jerusalem has always listened differently. It hears things before the rest of the world does. Footsteps of empires, whispers of angels, echoes of prophecies too old to die. On that night, the city didn't just witness the event, it felt it. Old stone walls, carved by centuries of prayer and blood, began to tremble. Not from bombs or earthquakes, but from something deeper, something eternal. As the golden light hovered above the dome of the rock, a stillness swept across the hills. No dogs barked, no alarms sounded. The city didn't move, it watched. In the alleyways of the old city, elderly men abandoned their tea, staring skyward in silence. Young soldiers froze mid-patrol, their radios crackling with static and confusion. Priests at midnight vigil lowered their candles. Children pressed their faces to windows, eyes wide with unfiltered awe. And then came the wave. It wasn't a sound, it wasn't a wind. It was something like weight, a presence, moving through every street, brushing against every soul. One witness described it like this. It felt like the sky was leaning in, like heaven was breathing on our necks. The light grew brighter, not blinding, but revealing. Every surface it touched reflected more than just physical color. It seemed to expose truth. Windows shimmered like water. The golden dome glowed like molten sun, and in the faces of those watching, something shifted. Some wept, others smiled, a few turned and ran, and above it all, the figure remained, silent, still, surrounded by the host of winged beings. They did not speak, but their silence said enough. Ancient Jewish texts speak of a day when the mount will be visited again, when he who ascended will descend once more, and the world will no longer be able to deny the divine. Some believe that night fulfilled that promise. Others whisper that it was only a precursor, a testing of the watchers to see who would recognize the truth and who would be seduced by light alone. Because in prophecy, light is not always safety. Even Lucifer once shone. So the question rises, what happens when heaven sends a sign, but not the explanation? And who dares claim they understand it? There is no stage more sacred or more contested than the Temple Mount. At its heart, the dome of the rock does not simply stand, it sits upon the weight of ages. It is not just architecture, it is argument made of stone. It is the place where prophecy meets geography, where God's past, man's present, and the world's future collapse into one sacred hill. And on that night, it glowed. From every corner of the city, eyes turned to the golden dome as the light above it intensified. But this wasn't ordinary light. It seemed to pulse with intelligence, as though it knew exactly where it was falling, like a spotlight from the heavens, or a divine microscope. Why here? Because this sight is not random. It is the axis upon which three faiths spin. For Jews, it is the place where Abraham prepared to sacrifice Isaac, where the Holy of Holies once held God's presence. For Muslims, it is where Muhammad ascended into heaven on the night journey. For Christians, it is part of the sacred ground where Jesus taught, wept, and prophesied the end of days. And for prophecy, it is the place where many believe the third temple will rise. Some ancient rabbis speak of this mount as the navel of creation, the spot where the world began and where the final reckoning will be declared. Others believe it is the thinnest place between dimensions, a portal not only to God's presence, but also to judgment. So when the light descended here, and nowhere else, it was not theatrical, it was intentional, and the timing, uncanny. Jerusalem had just endured a night of missile sirens, chaos, fear, and when the physical war quieted, a spiritual disturbance emerged, uninvited but unmistakable. The war stopped. The signs began. But signs from whom? Was this the arrival of the king foretold in Zechariah? Who will stand on the Mount of Olives and split it in two? Or is this the herald of the false one, who comes in peace but speaks lies, bearing light but bringing shadow? The dome stood untouched, but the air around it trembled. And in that trembling, one question remained. Was this the seal of God descending, or the trap being set? Before the light came the sound, and it wasn't made by any machine. It didn't crack like thunder or drone like jets. It vibrated. It rose from everywhere and nowhere, rolling across the stones of Jerusalem like the voice of something ancient, returning to claim what was his. Eyewitnesses called it trumpets, but not brass, not orchestral, not military. These were tones that pierced the soul, low, drawn out, echoing with a kind of holy grief, as if eternity itself was mourning or warning. Some fled their beds, others dropped to their knees. In certain quarters, people screamed, but most, they simply stood frozen, listening. The Bible is filled with warnings about these very sounds. In Revelation 8, 7 trumpets are prepared by 7 angels, each announcing a divine judgment upon the earth. In Joel 2, the prophet declares, "Blow the trumpet in Zion, for the day of the Lord is near." And in Exodus 19, when God descended on Mount Sinai, the people heard trumpet blasts that grew louder and louder until the mountain shook. That night in Jerusalem, the air held those same tones and something else. Some said they heard whispers in the wind, words they didn't understand but felt in their bones. Others heard their own names called out from the sky. A few reported hearing nothing at all, but feeling their very organs rattle under the weight of the soundless presence. There was no source, no radar blip, no sonic origin, no weather pattern to blame. Scientists remained silent. Military spokesmen looked shaken. And yet, all across the city, people described the same tone, the same trembling, the same sense that the veil between heaven and earth had stretched thin, and that sound had leaked through. But if these were the trumpets of heaven, what were they announcing? A king's arrival, a judgment's beginning, a deception's opening act. Even now, days later, people who heard it report insomnia, dreams of war, and an overwhelming sense of urgency, as if they were waiting for something else to happen, as if the sound wasn't finished yet. Because sometimes God doesn't speak in sentences, He speaks in frequencies, and once you've heard the sound of the sky, silence never feels the same again. What the eye saw was glory. What the footage revealed was mystery. In the hours after the event, as videos flooded social media and live streams were replayed, analysts and spiritual seekers alike began to study the frames, slow motion, color-corrected, every second examined like holy parchment. And in that footage, buried inside the beam of descending light, something appeared. Symbols, glowing, ancient, hidden to the naked eye, but undeniable once revealed. At first, they looked like mere digital artifacts, but when enhanced and cross-referenced, something shocking emerged. They matched markings found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, specifically those recovered from the Qumran caves, scrolls long associated with the final apocalypse and the secrets of divine judgment. These were not random etchings. They resembled the old Hebrew pictographs, some lost to modern knowledge, others only partially deciphered. And yet their shapes matched symbols for judgment, fire, portal, king, and, most terrifying of all, division. Division between what? Heaven and earth? Sheep and goats? Truth and deception? Those who studied the scrolls for decades stood stunned. One scholar whispered, "It's as if someone or something is picking up where the scrolls stopped." The prophecy is continuing. And that's what chilled those watching closely. Because if what appeared that night was not just visual but scripted, then it wasn't a random miracle. It was a message. The Bible is filled with divine writing, on tablets, on walls, even on flesh. From the 10 Commandments to the mysterious words written during Belshazzar's feast. Mene, mene, tekel, uparsin. God has often spoken not just through voice, but through signs no man dares ignore. So the question isn't just what was written in the light, but who was meant to read it. The symbols were not broadcast across the world. They were embedded, hidden in plain sight, visible only to those looking deeper, like a whisper in a storm, a signal for the watchman, a message to the remnant. And if the message has already been sent, what comes next? Because prophecy doesn't just speak, it builds, and what's written in light rarely disappears without consequence. By morning, the city was different, but it wasn't just Jerusalem that had changed. The world had seen it. The footage had gone viral, the golden light, the descending figure, the sound, the symbols. It swept across continents like fire across dry grass. People didn't just watch it, they felt it. Not just as spectators, but as participants in something too real, too holy, too dangerous to ignore. In churches across America, emergency vigils broke out, pastors abandoning their sermons mid-sentence to gather their people in prayer. In South Korea, hundreds knelt in silence in candlelit temples facing toward Jerusalem. In Brazil, mosques echoed with voices rising together in awe, confusion, and worship. But it wasn't all peace. In Rome, the Vatican convened a closed-door meeting. No statements were released. In Tel Aviv, military command called for immediate atmospheric scans that returned nothing but static. In Tehran, clerics debated whether this was a sign of Isa's return or a deception from the West. And in the streets of Jerusalem, people began to weep. Not from fear, from recognition. Something had shifted. Something eternal had touched the present. The veil hadn't just thinned. It had been pierced. But pierced by whom? Was this divine visitation, or the first move in a celestial war? Rabbis revisited Zechariah 14, where the nations gather against Jerusalem and the Lord descends to fight. Christian pastors flipped to Revelation 19, where the heavens open and the King of Kings appears on a white horse, followed by the armies of heaven. Islamic scholars cited hadiths of Isa returning during the end times, descending from the sky to confront falsehood. All three called it significant, but none could agree on its meaning. And maybe that's the point, because if the event unified vision, but divided interpretation, then its power wasn't just in what was seen, but in what was stirred. Some called it miracle, others mass delusion. A few, the beginning of the great deception. But even the skeptics fell quiet, because once the light has come, it doesn't leave without taking something with it. And what it took that night was certainty. Now only faith remains. He stood in the center of it all, still, silent, shining. Clothed in a robe of flowing light, he descended like a breath, slow, deliberate, regal. No wings, no crown, no weapon, just presence, radiant, commanding, and deeply familiar. Across the city, across the world, millions watched, some with awe, others with terror. Was this Jesus Christ, returning as promised, or a being cloaked in false glory? The prophets warned us, in the last days, signs and wonders would multiply, but so would deception. In Matthew 24, Jesus himself said that false messiahs would rise, performing great signs to deceive, even the elect. So who was this? Because what made the moment more troubling was what followed next. A white dove, brilliant and weightless, descended from the same sky, landing softly on the figure's shoulder. To many, it was unmistakable, the symbol of the Holy Spirit, just as it appeared at Jesus' baptism in the Jordan. But to others, it was a trap, a near-perfect imitation of the sacred. And that's what makes deception so deadly. Scripture tells us that the Antichrist will not come snarling. He will not wear horns. He will come speaking peace, cloaked in light, and bearing a message so beautiful that it lures the hearts of the desperate. He will offer unity, clarity, and a new way, and he will speak in words that sound like Scripture, but are hollow inside. And that's what many fear this moment was. Not the return of the true Christ, but the unveiling of a counterfeit. And yet, there were no threats, no doctrines preached, no commands issued, only a look, one glance over the city from the radiant figure, as if taking measure, not of buildings, not of governments, but of hearts. And then he vanished. Some say it was into the clouds, others say into light. A few say They never saw him leave, only felt that he was gone. But what if he never left? What if the next time he appears, words will follow? A gospel that isn't the gospel, a light that isn't salvation, a command that isn't from heaven. And the world will follow him not because of fear, but because of hope. Hope is what blinds us the fastest when we're starving for miracles. There is a gate in Jerusalem that has not opened for nearly 500 years. The Eastern Gate, also called the Golden Gate, remains sealed, its ancient stones locked in silence. But Ezekiel saw it long before it was bricked shut. He said the Lord had entered through it, and would again, and until that day, no man was to pass through. That prophecy has hung over the city like a spiritual countdown. And now, rumors spread. On the night the figure appeared, tremors, unmeasurable, unrecorded, but deeply felt, rippled beneath the Temple Mount. People standing near the eastern wall reported an odd vibration in the stones, as if something underneath was shifting, pressing upward, stirring. Some claimed the very alignment of the gate's foundation had subtly changed. Engineers sent to inspect the site found no structural threat, but couldn't explain the hairline cracks that appeared where none had existed before. The ancients believed this gate was more than an entrance. They called it a threshold, a divine point where heaven touches earth, a corridor for the king to walk through when he returns in glory. And now, it may be waking. Psalm 24 says, "Lift up your heads, O gates, that the King of glory may come in." What happens when the gate begins to lift? Not metaphorically, but physically. Could it be that the night skies weren't the only thing pierced? Could the ground itself be responding to a presence the world wasn't ready for? Or worse, could the gate be preparing to open for someone else? There are whispers that the one who appears before the gate opens is not always the one who is meant to pass through it, that the false one will arrive first, that the true king comes only after the world bows to another. And if that gate opens too soon, will it be a moment of triumph or of terrible mistake? Because once the gate opens, it will not close again until the story ends. Before judgment speaks with fire, it whispers through the earth. In the weeks leading to the heavenly event over Jerusalem, the world had already begun to tremble. But no one paid attention. Not yet. They were small things, strange things. Birds circling over the Temple Mount without reason. Dogs howling in unison at nothing. Weather patterns shifting without storms. A tension in the sky. And then came the greater signs. The Euphrates River, once a mighty current threading through prophecy, continued to dry. The book of Revelation warns that when this river fades, it prepares the way for kings from the east, a harbinger of approaching war. Yet now it lies cracked and shallow, bones of ancient cities rising where water once ruled. In the south, a plague of locusts, not like the usual but massive, devoured farmlands in hours. Trees stripped, skies blackened, the air thick with wings. It was as if Exodus had replayed itself on a modern screen. Earthquakes, not massive, not headline-making, but frequent, unusual, in places they shouldn't be, and their timing, too close, too precise. Nature isn't random in prophecy, it obeys before men do. Romans 8 says, "All of creation groans, waiting for redemption, aching beneath the weight of sin and coming glory." And perhaps this is that groan growing louder. But the most chilling report came from a group of pilgrims walking the Mount of Olives 2 days before the event. They described seeing orbs of light drifting like watchers between the trees. No sound, no heat, just presence. One man fell to his knees and said he felt like he was being observed, not by a drone or technology, but by the eyes of heaven. And then came the dreams. Scattered across the world, unrelated believers began reporting the same symbols: wings, fire, a man in white, and a gate slowly opening. Coincidence is no longer an option. Creation itself is shifting, groaning, alerting. Because prophecy doesn't begin with fireworks. It begins with a whisper. That becomes a rumble, that becomes a trumpet, that becomes a shaking. And in that shaking, hearts must choose. Do they run toward the light or toward the nearest excuse? You don't always know when history changes, but your soul does. It was just one night, one moment over Jerusalem. A light, a figure, a sound that didn't belong to this world. But from that moment forward, the world has felt tilted, thinner, charged. Because this wasn't just a miracle, it wasn't just awe, it was a marker, a signpost in the divine script written long before your birth. And now, the question isn't did this happen, but what does it mean? In Revelation 11, we're told the holy city will be trampled by nations for 42 months. In Daniel 12, a time of distress comes like never before. And in Matthew 24, the Son of Man appears in the clouds, and every eye sees him. But before that, many will see someone else, a mimic, a deceiver, a light that does not save, but seduces. And this is where we stand, between awe and deception, between prophecy fulfilled and prophecy twisted, between the real return and the rehearsal of one. Because make no mistake, what happened in Jerusalem was not random. The veil was pierced, the gates stirred, the symbols glowed, the watchers descended, and the hearts of men were weighed in silence. This was not the end. This was the announcement. The next event will not ask your permission. It will not wait for belief. It will come like lightning, from east to west, and every knee will bend, whether willing or trembling. So now, we ask the only question that matters. Are you ready? Not curious, not fascinated. Ready? Because the next sound you hear may not be a trumpet of warning. It may be the final call. And when it sounds, you won't have time to choose. So listen closely. Watch the skies. Guard your heart. The stones are moving. The gate is breathing. And heaven is closer than we think.